Okay, hello everyone. I'm Dr. Alison Müller. I am a communications officer for the Canadian Clinical HIV Trials Network, as well as the Center for Health Evaluation and Outcome Sciences. It's a lot, but basically what I do is make sure that science gets heard and is out to the public, especially based in Vancouver. So one thing that I would like to share is I am on unceded stolen land of the Salish, Musqueam, and sorry, I'm like completely nervous right now. Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. I do have a link to nativeland.ca that shows the various territories of Indigenous populations around the world. I've just put that into the link. So if you're welcome to share which land that you are from, that would be great. But yeah, we've got apparently an international event, which is wonderful. I will be introducing each of our panelists individually, and they will have about 2 to 3 minutes to speak to their SciComm journey, and then we'll get into some questions for each panelist. So I'm going to start off with Dr. Sara ElShafie. She's the Director of Scientific Storytelling and the Vice President of Science Communications at Weber Shandrick. So take it away, Dr. ElShafie.
Thank you. So we're just doing a few minutes like introduction about our background.
Yeah, 2 to 3 minutes.
Perfect, cool. Yeah, so hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm honored to be kicking us off with the introductions. As Alison mentioned, my name is Sara ElShafie, and I am a science storytelling coach and a global change biologist. And I currently work at a PR firm, a global public relations firm called Weber Shandwick. So I'll explain a little bit about how I ended up in that position. My interest in science communication started arguably from an early age, but really dedicated interest started when I was in graduate school as a PhD student. I noticed that about a year into my program, I was really struggling to explain my work to my own family. And that really bothered me. And I see some smiles and nodding heads, so I can imagine that a few of you can relate. Yeah, and I had also taken an interest in pursuing a career in science outreach when I was in university as an undergraduate. So I knew that those skills were going to be important to my career anyway. But really, it was a personal motivation. Like, if I can't explain what I'm doing to the people that I care about most, my own family, then what is the point of any of this? So that really launched me on a journey to try to figure out how to make science meaningful for people, scientists and people who aren't scientists. And I decided to focus on storytelling because I figured everybody enjoys hearing stories, myself included, and especially my family. So I actually reached out to professional storytellers at film studios and started learning from them and taking inspiration from my interactions with them and what I learned from them and some outreach initiatives that we collaborated on, took inspiration from that to develop practical approaches to science communication, especially geared toward public audiences. And what started as a passion project on the side grew into a side career while I was in graduate school. So I did that work freelance for about 4 years, running workshops, giving presentations, appearing on panels like this. And then during the pandemic, I actually turned it into an LLC. So I was self-employed as founder and principal of Science Through Story LLC for the last 2 years of my PhD. I was finishing my dissertation. And then this year, a couple of months ago, right after I finished my PhD, I was offered this newly created position as Director of Scientific Storytelling and Vice President of Scientific Communications at this global public relations firm called Weber Shandwick. So at Weber Shandwick, I create science communication workshops to offer to our clients. I help our teams integrate clear and compelling storytelling into the work that we do for our clients. And I also help to drive new business and recruit people who are interested in pursuing careers in science communication. So if that sounds like you, please feel free to reach out to me anytime.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Next up, we have Dr. Kaylee Byers. So she is the Deputy Regional Director of the British Columbia Canadian Wildlife Health Cooperative, also a University Research Associate at the Faculty of Health Science at Simon Fraser University. And she is also the host of Nice Genes podcast, a podcast sponsored by Genome British Columbia. Take it away.
Thanks, Alison. Hi, everyone. So delighted to be here and to be included in this. My path to science communication was definitely a bit of an unexpected one. I started out in grad school being really interested in sort of sharing science with kiddos. And so I did a lot of outreach in kids' classrooms and with a group that was called, is called Let's Talk Science, and another one. I'm originally from Edmonton on Treaty 6 territory, and it was called the Edmonton Outreach Network. And so I used to do some outreach there. And I, at one point, had this opportunity to talk at a nerd night in Edmonton. And nerd night is this event that essentially tries to break down barriers between scientists and the public with the basic idea that learning about science in a relaxed setting like a bar could be a great way to get people excited. And so I gave a talk about parasites because I loved parasites. So I talked about how parasites could manipulate their hosts. I had the most fun. And I was moving to Vancouver to start a PhD. And I said, oh, well, I'm going to volunteer with the Nerd Night. And then I get to Vancouver, to which the hosts of the Nerd Night in Edmonton said, there isn't one. And I said, oh, no, I guess I'm starting it. And so that's really how I got into science communication. So I moved to Vancouver. I started Nerd Night Vancouver with someone I didn't know at the time, but now is a dear friend, Michael Unger, who works at the Space Center here in Vancouver. And we were running it for about 7 years before the pandemic started. And so every night we'd have 3 people at the Fox Cabaret get up and share something, talk either about science or the arts or whatever. The whole idea was to get people chatting and nerding out together. And then when the pandemic hit, we decided to transition to a podcast. And I see in the chat, there's so many people who are doing podcasts, and podcasts are such a great way to get people engaged. And audio, I think, is such an interesting medium. And so we transitioned to a podcast called Nerdin' About, which was the aim was sort of to keep our little local community going. And we learned a lot. I learned that I'm not an editor of podcasts because that was partly my job. Well, it was my job. And it was a lot of fun. I learned a lot, and I learned that I loved audio. And so last year, I was really lucky because I was brought on by Genome British Columbia to host their new podcast called Nice Genes, which I've got a picture of here. We're in season 2. We just released an episode today, episode 4, all about coral and how we can use genomics to help prepare coral for the changing climate. And that's been an incredible journey. I've really enjoyed learning more about sharing science as a host of this podcast where you're really featuring other people. And I think the thing that I've really learned through this process is that I'm most interested in sharing science that intersects with society. So we do that in Nice Genes, what's the broader question? How can genomics sort of help answer these bigger questions that we face in society? But also opportunities to help other people share their science. And that's what I love so much about doing this work. And so I look forward to chatting more about all this in a little bit. Back to you, Alison.
Thank you. Yes, I am a fan of the podcast. There's a wonderful cold case episode that's the finale of season 1 that I highly recommend. Next up, we have Claudia Below. She is a PhD candidate, a neuroscience candidate at McGill University, as well as a science consultant with Curious Neuron.
Hey everyone, so I just want to say thank you so much for SCWIST having me here today on the panel. So I will just start by giving a little introduction. So I am currently a PhD candidate. I'm in my 4th year, and I am studying in the Meshwar lab, and I am studying molecular psychiatry. And so my sort of pathway into science communication is just starting. I'm very happy for SCWIST to have different levels of expertise on this call. So basically, I was in a few labs during undergrad, and I went into clinical research. I did some computer work where I just entered numbers into a data sheet, and then I switched into a more wet lab that I'm currently in. And just during the shifts between different labs, I realized that not everyone's able to talk about their research to the lay public, or I was very good at explaining to my friends and family what I was doing in these different labs in different realms of science, and I kind of just doing it. So throughout my PhD, I've been involved in multiple like outreach programs that my program at McGill, the Integrated Program in Neuroscience, actually organizes. So one that I started off with was called Brain Reach, and this is a program where PhD candidates or master's students would go into elementary schools and high schools and actually teach neuroscience to like children or teens. So I started with that and I really liked it, and I saw how like you can really change a way that a kid looks at science just by explaining to them in a way that they understand. And then next I went into a training program called Neurolingo, also run by my my school program. And this was actually what launched my career in science communication. So this is a program where they actually train you to give a TED Talk style presentation about your PhD in 10 minutes. So just this was recorded in like a very professional way and like hosted on YouTube. And from this, I got a lot of podcast invites. So I've appeared on a few podcasts. I also, was asked by various organizations within Quebec to give some lunchtime presentations to the general public. And from that, I actually decided that I was going to pursue sort of a part-time job along with my PhD as a science consultant. And so then I started working with Curious Neuron, which I, work with the podcast portion of that company, as well as I manage clients sort of client accounts. And so I interact a lot with the clients and I consult in a scientific way. So I help them understand the science and share it with the public. So that's sort of my path. It's kind of the beginning still. And I also have my Instagram that I'm trying to work on, but it's a bit hard with a part-time job and a PhD. So with time, I will get better at that. And that's me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So next up, we have Elaine Yong, who I have had the pleasure of working with. And she is currently the communications manager at B.C. Children's Hospital Research, but she does have a formal background in news reporting with Global TV. So I'll have her take it away.
Thank you so much, Alison. And before I get started with telling you a little bit more about myself, I just want to say that I am also, like Alison, a settler on the unceded and traditional territories of the Coast Salish people. That's the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. And I feel very privileged that I am a settler here in these beautiful lands, which are actually covered in snow. So for all of you who live outside of the west coast of BC, please just, indulge us, British Columbians, Vancouverites, who don't usually get a lot of snow, as the whole world comes to a stop tonight and overnight because it's snowing here. Anyhow, I just want to say, first of all, I think I am the least smart person in this entire group, and I'm talking all 131 other people. It's such an honor and privilege to be part of this panel, especially because I feel like I'm coming at this completely from a non-scientific point of view. So I didn't start in science unless you count, grade 12 biology, but based on everyone's LinkedIn profiles and what all the other amazing things you guys are doing, you're far beyond my high school biology. I actually went into journalism. So as Alison said, I did spend a number of years as a television reporter, in fact, more than 20 years in television news. And, when I went to journalism school, I actually thought to myself, like, oh, I really actually would love to be Jeannie Becker. Those of you who are old enough to remember Jeannie Becker, she had fashion television. I thought that was super cool. So, when you're 16, trying to decide on the rest of your life, those are my aspirations. Thankfully, I quickly realized that being a fashion reporter was probably not a very practical job. And then I thought maybe I'd be a foreign correspondent. And then I just thought, okay, you know what, let's just try to be a regular reporter. So for most of my career in television news, I was a general assignment reporter. I did lots of different things. I did some anchoring, all kinds of stories, court stories, some health stories, just all over the place. But it was near the last few years when I was in the newsroom that I actually started filing health stories specifically. So I became a health reporter for the last little bit of my time, which was now, as Alison mentioned, at Global News in Vancouver. And you know what? I really loved it. And at the same time, my oldest daughter, who's now 11, when she was born, she was actually within the first few weeks of her life diagnosed with basically complete heart failure. I mean, we could spend an hour and a half just talking about transplant and all those things, but she ultimately required a heart transplant. So when she was 3.5 weeks old, she received her gift of life. She's now 11 and a half. And so that's really shaped my life. You know, obviously the health reporting came before that. And ironically, I'd actually done a series of stories about transplant while I was pregnant with her, not knowing that I would be walking down that same path less than a year later. So I've also been a patient partner in research, which I think is really important thing to remember, especially because I see most of the people here come from a science background. To me, I think when it comes to science communications, it's really about the patient. And thank you, Sara, for just voicing that so well in your introduction. You know, like when she said, if I can't explain what I'm doing to my family, then what am I doing? And so after 20 plus years in journalism, I moved into healthcare communications. So I was doing some communications for one of our big hospitals here, St. Paul's Hospital. Providence Healthcare, for those of you familiar with BC's health authorities. Spent some time at BC Transplant, also spent some time at Chaos with Alison, and now I'm at Children's Hospital Research Institute. And to me, what I like to share with our scientists is that if you cannot explain what the hell you're doing all day in your research, and explain why it's important, then you're kind of missing the whole point. Because I think researchers are trying to make a difference, right? That's ultimately what everyone's trying to do. And I think that is so important to be able to articulate that. And I feel really inspired by all of these, you know, young people, old people, so many amazing women that you're here to listen, and that hopefully, you know, you can get some good tips, but I am looking forward to sharing more with you and happy to connect if anyone has any questions on the journalism side of things. It's definitely been a really great transition for me into healthcare comms, and I really loved being the storyteller. And, you know, I worked with Lillian as well on the communication side, and I'm so happy to see her on the panel. You know, anything to do with robots, pets, those are story topics that the public love. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Wonderful. Thank you for the perfect transition to our next guest. This is Dr. Lillian Hung, is a chaos scientist. She is also the head of the IDEA Lab, which is on innovation in dementia and aging. She's a Canada Research Chair in Senior Care and an assistant professor at the School of Nursing at B.Sc, and she will introduce herself now.
Oh, thank you, Alison, and thank you for that, Elaine. Elaine is really wonderful to work with as well. And I feel that I'm not a journalist, and I am a researcher. So to be able to work with people that communicate, like people like and like Alison, and people who are in chaos, to help me to translate the research, and it's just wonderful. So I am assistant professor and Canada Research Chair, like what Alison has introduced. And I think what I do, it's really unique. It's about working with patient partners. So in my lab that I bring a really large team of young students at EBC, that they are from all different disciplines: engineering, integrated science, psychology, chemistry, nutrition, nursing, medicine. They all came together, and because they wanted to do something that using research, they want to learn about research, but really they wanted to do with the lab. It's really trying to help the world, to make something that would be impactful, or something that will be helpful for the populations. The population that I work with, the patient partners that I work with, they are older adults. So they are one of my partner, and she's 86, and the others, and they're really, some of them, they're quite old, and but they are actively work with the students, and that makes the work really rewarding, not only for the students, but also for the older adults themselves as well. I'm sorry, I'm in GH, so that's a little bit of siren, must be an ambulance. And so I use a lot of patient stories and working with patient partners to see what we can do in terms of technology to support patient care, like what Elaine said that I do with robotics. So we have worked with a baby seal parrot. We have worked with a telephysis robot, which is really active in a 3-year project. We are also working on another roaming robot that's for safety to roam around a care facility to see any version, and that's for safety. And we're working on a new robot, which is what we call a calm robot. It's help people for stress release, which is really important during the pandemic times for mental health and wellness. So to be able to communicate these kind of work that the robotic, how we work with people with older adults. So we really need to communicate in a very a clear way, because we work patient partners. And we also work with clinicians that they are at all different disciplines. We work care aides, we work people, they might be in housekeeping and the nurses and frontline staff. So if we use jargon, so anything that's too not understandable, then that does not work for us. So we do co-design, participatory action research. So so the topics about science and communications is close to my heart. So I'm going to stop here and let Alison introduce another person.
Thank you so much, Lillian. Yeah, so I don't know if you've noticed, but in the background, one of the telepresence robots is hanging out there. I put a link in the global news story. Also, there are a lot of links going to be in the chat. So I would recommend maybe having a document off to the side and recording them. We'll also save the chat after the event, and we'll compile the links and send that out to everyone that attended as well. And then last but certainly not least, we have Maddie Massey-Westrop, a science communicator and creator of MADS from Lab.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me all the way from Sydney. I think I might be the furthest removed from the rest of the group. So my journey in science communication started when I was pretty young. I was a kid who loved telling stories and reading stories. I was a voracious reader of National Geographic novels, everything. And I also really loved science. And I thought maybe the dream, the perfect job would be to be able to tell stories about science to other people and sort of share that. But it wasn't a real job. So I became a researcher. So I did my bachelor's and my master's degrees in cancer immunology. And I worked at a few different institutions around the world. And that was really amazing. But I think that there was always something missing. And the times that I felt really energized and really excited about my work was when I was actually at conferences or outreach events or doing presentations and sharing my research. So I started a blog called Mads from Lab a few years ago, and was writing science stories pitched towards everyday people who didn't necessarily have the background that I did in research. And I found that really interesting, but also no one was reading them besides maybe my grandma and 5 other people. So I started getting into social media, short form video to be precise, mainly on Instagram and TikTok. And that's when I started to see a lot more traction for my content. So I make short science videos. They're usually about 60 seconds long under the name Mads from Lab, about all kinds of medical and health topics. And I found a really great community of people online who are really interested in this stuff and want to learn more, and in an accessible, short way. So I feel like that's been a really great way to connect with people who are from my age group or even younger, and all across the spectrum. I've also recently joined the University of New South Wales in Sydney as a full-time science communicator. So essentially that means I work with the medical faculty as a bridge between the medical researchers and the public. So I write science stories and I pitch them to newspapers. I also publish them under our own channels. I also do our social media. So sometimes that means tapping the researchers on the shoulder and then getting them to do a video. I'm still awaiting the moment where someone agrees to do a TikTok dance with me. I don't know if it will ever come, but I hope it does. And I also do media training with the academics. So that involves teaching them about interacting with the media, the benefits of that, how they can do it better, and role-playing different situations, interviews and stuff like that. So it's a really great way to bring other people along the science communication journey as well. And yeah, so that's really me. I'm super excited to be in a virtual room with people who are all interested in science communication, and I can't wait to get talking. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Wonderful. Okay, so what we've done is I've got a couple questions that I believe was sent to the panelists ahead of time. So the first one is, were there any unexpected challenges that you had to come when, like during your SciComm journey, ideally at the beginning, but anything kind of like bumps or hurdles that were unexpected? And if you want to raise your hand, and then I can just facilitate it that way so that everyone's not talking at the same time. Does anyone want to go first? Okay, we'll start with Kaylee.
Thanks. Wow. One thing that was unexpected for me when I started was how little support there was for science communication. And this is about a decade ago, and I think that that's changed a lot. You can see it online. There's so much more interest in science communication, even as a scientist now, when you write grants, a huge component of that is knowledge translation. And I think we're moving towards meaningful science communication and not just, I'm going to publish it in a paper. I think all that's great. But at the time, there was a lot of concern from other scientists about mentors, how much time I was going to be spending on this. Was it going to take away from my science? What was the value of it? And I didn't expect to run into that. And it was something I didn't always navigate very well. But I think something that helped was recognizing that actually skills in communications and science communication made me a better scientist and made me a better researcher and just made me a better person generally. And I think as I was able to start showing these other people that I work with that the skills that I gained through science communication translated into other avenues of my life, it was clearer to them that they could and should support it. And so I'd say that was an unexpected challenge that took some time to figure out how to navigate.
Perfect. And then I saw Maddie had her hand up immediately, and then Sarah.
Something that came to mind immediately for me when you asked this question was battling misinformation. I think that's been a huge thing for me, being online a lot, being on social platforms like Instagram and TikTok, particularly during the pandemic, creating content about COVID and about vaccination. I think I almost was a little hesitant to create content around this because I knew that there would be a lot of backlash potentially and different opinions going around online. But then ultimately, I think I realized in that process that it is overall really helpful for me to add a voice to the discussion, which is backed by science and, taking opinion from the experts around the world and people in the field. I think it can be tempting when you're starting out in science communication and maybe you're talking about topics that do have a bit more of a controversial angle to get caught up in sort of negative conversations and negative cycles. But ultimately, for me, the most helpful thing is just to add a positive, informed voice and not get caught up in that. And that's been a good realization and a good learning.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Sarah.
I'll just echo what has been shared already. And I'll also add two unexpected challenges that I ran into. One was it just so happened that the first official planned hands-on workshop, science communication workshop that I ran, it happened to be 2 days after the 2016 presidential election in the United States. And that was a time when literally, science had already been largely politicized in many respects before that, but overnight it was just it skyrocketed. And a lot of scientists were suddenly really freaking out about how science was being treated and received by many parts of the federal government in our country. And so it was a very interesting time. And up until that point, I had thought that the biggest challenge was kind of like Kaylee was saying, was going to be just getting people to prioritize science communication training in the way that they also were pressed to prioritize writing grants and writing papers, both of which of course have to do with science communication. But up until then, it was kind of taken for granted that, well, you'll just figure out what you need to do those things. And science communication wasn't really recognized yet as a separate skill set that requires practice and training. But suddenly that was no longer really the primary challenge, at least in my experience. Overnight, the challenge became not getting people to show up because suddenly everybody was prioritizing it much more. But the challenge was to help people understand that science communication isn't about having a defense strategy. First and foremost, that might be part of it in some situations, but first and foremost, science communication is really about establishing a connection with people, about finding a human connection, especially around very technical content, and connecting with people on an emotional level, human being to human being, before anything else. Because without that connection, any information you might share is going to be meaningless. So that focusing on that challenge framed everything that I've done in science communication ever since, and it continues to do so. And the other unexpected challenge I ran into was finding potential solutions and approaches that could help with that. And that led me not just to seek out existing science communication resources, but to seek inspiration and resources from other areas that I might not have thought to look to otherwise, like artists working in the film industry. I worked with a lot of artists at Pixar Animation Studios, DreamWorks Animation Studios, Industrial Light and Magic, like places that I never would have thought to reach out to, but turns out they were full of science nerds who were just as excited to talk to scientists. And that exchange really created a very fruitful opportunity to inspire each other. And then eventually led me into this job working at a public relations firm. But I didn't know that that even existed as a job. And I never would have thought that like reaching out to film studios would be an option, especially while in grad school. But the need, the urgency of science communication encouraged me or motivated me to seek solutions in unexpected places, or at least to just branch out my own awareness of where could I find potential approaches that would be helpful here, and what are the possibilities, what are the opportunities out there. So I want to emphasize that these unexpected challenges also became incredible opportunities, and finding that intersection has really been an absolute thrill. So this will kind of relate to maybe a later question, but I'll just say it now. If you have an interest that you think might intersect with communicating science, I really encourage you to pursue it and explore that intersection, because you never know where it might lead you or how you might be able to contribute as a result.
Very true. Excellent. Some very excellent points. Yes, storytelling, that human connection is so important when sharing any kind of science story, especially since so much of science is still seemed to be trapped in that ivory tower. So I believe we had Claudia also wanted to share something.
Yeah, so I'll just talk about two different hurdles. So the first, actually, Jared brought it up in the chat, is not only learning how to communicate science yourself, but how to teach others to communicate science. So now working with Curious Neuron, we're onboarding, different grad students to write blog posts and things like that that are science backed. And like my boss and I are really realizing that like it's not a skill that everyone just has. It's really something you need to foster and practice. And the question is like how. So I see that I think Alison put up, Kaylee put up ComSci Can. So I think that's great. I think it's once a year from what I know. But like, I think like look within your programs, look within your school, look within the neighboring universities, see if they have programs that, students create. Doesn't necessarily need to be like an international thing, but my program had Neurolingo and Brain Reach, and it's all student organized. And it's like, if it doesn't exist yet, you can start it. I know there's some people that just have a skill for teaching how to communicate, whether it be science or just other, fields. But I think that's just one hurdle that I still don't really know how to jump over. We're still working at it. The second hurdle I would say is, as a researcher, and when you present at a conference or at a talk, you know exactly what you're going to say, how to answer the scientific questions from a research point of view, how, what background information you need to, have in your brain before you give your presentation. But when you're talking to a general audience, I find that sometimes the questions that people ask are so out of the box that sometimes it's like, whoa, I would have never thought of that coming from like a science background where I already know this thing, but I never knew that it's, you know, I didn't realize it's something that general audience wouldn't know. So just expecting as a researcher to know every answer and know how to answer every question is not necessary to start a science communication career. You know, you can learn as you learn how to communicate science. You can learn with your audience. You don't have to pretend to know it all, because it's not possible to know everything. And I think that's just something that I really had to, you know, get over myself just starting my career. Is like, okay, maybe I won't know all the answers, but I still think I can help with things that I do know. So yeah, those are my 2 hurdles.
Fabulous. Lillian, is there anything as a professor that is torn with so many different responsibilities? Do you have any advice of hurdles or things to overcome?
Yeah, lots of hurdles, lots of challenges. And I would go back to what Sara talked about, like human connections. And I find it in the academic world that it's very hard, very difficult to have this authentic, really like relationship. And there's maybe work probably with some of the very established academic you know, scientists. It's not so easy. I remember that in the beginning, I was talking to a mentor. The first question, we sat down for a coffee and she asked me, how many publications do I have? I was shocked. And it was so, that was the first question that she asked me. So, but I would also say that I was find it very unexpected that it's also how easy it is to build connections with people that I don't know at all. So, I mean, when I go on the online with social medias, and I have made so many friends and people that I never expected I could actually connect with them. Again, these people that could also be very established. I find it very interesting when I go to Twitter that I could like talk to a very famous scientist that casually. And then they will talk back, and then we could become like friends and recognize like each other's work. And I find it's very, very like it can be very difficult, but it also can be very easy. And I was hired as a professor starting during the pandemic time, so I didn't have opportunity to meet a lot of people that I would like to meet in person to learn from them and learn from their model and how to become successful. So I rely on a lot of online opportunities to build relationship, and yeah, and most of my work is really rely on being relational, and I find that the work that would only be meaningful to me is I find the relationship that we have it's meaningful. It's like the way that I work with my patient partners, with students. So yeah, so I guess my answer is that it's very difficult, and it also can be very easy. So it's very interesting.
Wonderful, thank you. We actually Chaos just collaborated with Lillian and the Idea Lab on an article on how to get your lab up on Twitter. So I'll be sharing that link shortly, but there is, Elaine has a few words to say as well about hurdles, especially with her unique perspective as a reporter.
Thanks, Alison. And I did see that article that you and Lillian worked on together, and I promptly sent it over to my team and said, let's steal some things for our researchers from this. So, you know, there are a couple of thoughts that I had, and like everyone else's comments are just really bang on, especially around misinformation and trying to navigate that. So I'm not going to talk about that, but I wanted to share with you a story from my days as a journalist, because, you know, as much as we like to pretend that that we're working towards equality, there isn't. And, you know, especially when you have a certain kind of person who is still in charge of many of our, you know, organizations, our businesses, our academic institutions. So this was about, I want to say about halfway through my career. I think I'd been working for 7 years or so. And so just like in many television newsrooms or just any newsrooms in general, you guys, every so often there's another round of layoffs, right? It just happens all the time. Apparently there's a saying that you haven't made it as a reporter or a journalist unless you've been laid off at least once or twice. So it was my turn to get laid off from my job. And so I was trying to find another position at Global, which is where I ended up the last, 10 plus years of my career. And, frankly, I didn't have a lot of bargaining power because I had just been laid off. And so I was talking to the news director there about coming to work at the station. And my husband was also at the station. He still is at the station. He is also a television reporter. And I just remember we're negotiating salary. And the news director said to me, and he is a really fantastic person in so many ways, but just like this example, I think just really paints that picture of how things don't really change and haven't really changed. He said, well, I'm going, no, I can't pay you more than Aaron. That just wouldn't be right. And I just looked at him and I just thought, but I have, 5 years plus more experience than my husband. And you're telling me that for whatever arbitrary reason, it wouldn't look right if I got paid more than someone who had less experience than I did. And so, you know what, I didn't really say anything. And I just felt like, well, I can't say anything. I'm just happy that they're going to hire me full time. And I regret that. And I always regretted it. And you know what the thing is when you don't value yourself the way you should be valued, it lives with you forever. Because, there's no way you're going to make up that, $5,000, $10,000, whatever it is, 5 years down the road. At no point is anyone going to say to you, oh, you know what, we didn't pay you enough to start with because we were discriminating against you because you're a woman. So let's just give you an extra $10,000 this year. It doesn't happen. So, and something also happened similarly in my healthcare communications career, where again, I don't think it was for lack of trying. It wasn't a male boss that I had at the time, but same thing. I actually afterwards, I negotiated for other things instead. So it was fine. But I did think to myself, I wonder if I was a man, if this conversation would have gone differently. Right. And whether it was not so much maybe under her control, but under who she was trying to apply to get more money. Like if they saw a man's name on there, would it have been different? They saw a person's name, not obviously like an ethnic name, would it also have been different? So I think, I really just want to impart, I see so many young women, older women, various stages of your career. I think the important thing is do not undersell yourself. Don't undervalue. And you may think, well, if I'm not going to be like some intense PhD, like crazy clinician scientist person who's bringing in these $1 million grants, like is my job, is what I do as valuable? It is. It really is, because your voice is the one that helps people, whether it's yourself or other researchers, get the funding. Right? The research that we know about and that we fall in love with and that we're really interested in, those are the projects that get the money. So the only other thing I want to say about challenges is that it's you guys who are my challenges, the scientists. Oh my God. I get that the methodology of this research study is really, really special. And you've used all these like special things and like these various new techniques. And I always have this sort of little debate with researchers who are really fixated on things like methodology. I know from a scientific point of view that methodology is really, really important. But what I really want to know as a member of the public, as a non-scientist, is how is this going to change my life? How is this going to change the life of my transplant kid? Is this going to turn transplant into a cure? Can she stop taking those horrible anti-rejection meds? Is the COVID vaccine going to work for her? What about my elderly parents? Like, is this drug going to save them? Like, those are the questions that I want to know. Like, is this gene that you've discovered, or the protein, or this like immunometabolism thing that you're doing, what's that going to mean down the road? What kind of hope does it give to me as a member of the public? So I think just remember that sometimes it's hard to get out of the science because that's what you spend your life doing. And that's what you spend all your time doing when you're studying and you're getting your PhD and you're getting those degrees and putting together those papers. But what is the ultimate goal of what you're doing? How are you going to help someone eventually? I'm not saying right now, I'm not saying tomorrow, I'm saying like 10 years down the road. Like, you are doing this because you think it's going to do something awesome down the road. What is that? And focus on that.
Wonderful. Excellent point. And yes, and this transitions nicely to the next question. So I know that there's been a significant increase in interest in science communication during the COVID-19 pandemic. And there's been a huge need for battling misinformation. There was a link that I posted in the chat. I can post it in again, but I'm just wondering, throughout your SciComm career, Did the pandemic influence or change anything for the better or for the worse? Did it change perspectives? What is expected of you? Open opportunities? If any of our panelists would like to comment on that, that would be great. Feel free to just unmute and go.
I think I can just comment. So what I've personally realized is that I feel like the public that I interact with has a bit less faith in scientists. I feel the way some things were communicated during the pandemic with all the misinformation found online is just confusing to everyone, like scientist or not. It's confusing. There was too many messages going out, too many different messages going out. And I think also too many messages that were like, here's the exact thing that's happening, instead of trying to break it down and say, look, this is happening, but we don't exactly know how it's going to progress, or we don't know how it's going to change. Or, you know, we think now you should wear this kind of mask, but who knows the next time what you should wear. You know, like it was just too blatantly said, this is what we have to do. And, you know, it was a global pandemic, things, nobody knew what was going on, but I don't think that was communicated enough by scientists or science communicators. So I know that a lot of people have lost trust in science, which is a bit sad, but I do know another big part of the population that has gained trust and realizes the importance of science communication.
Sure, Maddie, go ahead.
I think something that's been really positive during the COVID pandemic, that the profile of science communication is just so much higher. I think maybe a few years ago, if you said that you were a science communicator or you're doing science communication, a lot of people would just be like, what's that? But now during the pandemic, or sort of hopefully at the tail end, I think people are more aware of what it actually involves and the impact it can actually have on the public and the public's actions, and particularly public health outcomes. So that's been really massive for me to see, and really cool to see people paying more attention, and potentially also some more scientists seeing the importance and maybe sort of erring more in that way in their careers.
I'll jump in and echo both of those comments and just emphasize, I actually see it as a net positive result as well during the pandemic, that I think the scientific process has been in the public spotlight during the pandemic in a way that perhaps it never was before, just because of the incredible pace at which it had to happen. And so while yes, there's been a bunch of other problems that came up, like all the misinformation stuff we've been discussing, but I think overall many people have gained a much greater appreciation for just how important the scientific process is, especially when applied to things like healthcare, and an appreciation for just the process of building treatments and discovering new vaccines and medicines, and realizing just how many potential problems don't happen on a day-to-day basis because we know so much about this already, and you know, our medicine is so far advanced. So I think overall it's actually increased interest in science and science communication much more than before the pandemic. And I'll also add that I think another positive outcome was just the equity of virtual programming like this webinar. I can't tell you how many programs I have sat in on, how many programs I've been part of or contributed to. It's really connected the world in a way that was never possible before. I mean, like we were just on the verge of it really being possible, but obviously the pandemic just catalyzed it. And now it's part of how we connect. It's part of how we do business. It's part of how we keep in touch. And I don't think that's ever going to change.
Yeah, I would also echo the positive part that totally the pandemic opened opportunities. I'm looking at like the population that work with older adults and people living with dementia, that they have gone on Twitter, that I will be able to communicate and kind of listening to their lived experience, and during the journey, they are able to give direct voice about like what they're going through. Like I saw a study that looking at having a golden retriever, a dog that as a companion. I was able to follow that guy, like he was like he's living with dementia, and he tweet like a few times a day, and you really get a sense of what is it like to have that dog as a companion to help him. Unfortunately, the dog just died, but you really get it, like to be able to connect at that level. Which is incredible. And I heard from many of our patient partners that they become so productive because they could go on, jump into these Zoom calls. They could have like several meetings in a day. And typically if they have to travel to UBC or come to Vancouver for a meeting, they could only do one meeting a day. But now they're like going on like 3 meetings a day. They are able to be way more productive in terms of doing some of the research work. So, which is really amazing. But I would also say the downside is like, who are the people we left behind? So this wonderful opportunity allow people that they are able to jump into technology and use these online platforms. But what about those people that they don't have access, they don't have the same resources? And those people, the voice that we do not get to hear. So I am very concerned about that as well. Yeah, how can we support people to use technology or help those people that they are left behind? Yeah.
Yeah, Lillian, I think that's a really good point. And, you know, we do have some research happening at the Children's Research Institute looking at more inclusivity in research. And like you said, there are only certain kinds of people that have the resources and the access to technology. Like think of your, you know, if you have older relatives in your lives, like would they feel comfortable going on to Zoom to do some kind of research related call? But I just want to say like what everyone else has said about it, just opening that door and really people's interest in science is huge. I mean, just a great example when you think about the terminology that we are so familiar with now, not being scientists, you know, knowing things like reproductive number, and that's not like how many babies you're planning to have, but you know, PPE, these are terms that now we just throw out there and everyone knows what they mean. Like ECMO is my favorite because we learned about ECMO because my daughter was on ECMO when she was 3 weeks old, and they handed us this like giant brochure, extracorporeal membrane oxygenator, you know, here's like the 20-page document about how this thing works. Never heard of it before. When we told people, they would just look at us, and now after hearing about all these patients needing to go on ECMO, everyone's like, oh yeah, ECMO. So I think that's really like, that's changed the conversation as well, because now you have, you know, not everybody, but a lot of members of the public are more educated and they're more aware, and they can speak a different language than they would have been able to, you know, pre-2020.
I guess I'll jump in here at the end. I don't know how much I have to add. I think all of those points are really important. And as people have said, you know, we've shifted to a new communications landscape, which is incredible, but we've also left folks behind. I think one thing that I think has been really positive is because we've shifted to a new landscape of social media communications, it has made not just science more accessible, but science communication more accessible to a whole broad range of people. And I think that that's incredible. And we need more of that energy. We need everybody doing science communication because it's for everybody. And that is something that I think is great when folks can bring their own strengths in the TikTok, which I have zero strengths in, but you've got like TikTok and Twitter and Instagram, and folks are using all these different tools. There's like dancing, there's over 5 million podcasts. Like those aren't all science podcasts, but there's so much out there, and that's so exciting. It can be hard to wade through it all, but I think on the whole, that's a real benefit to have come out of the pandemic. And I know for me, things have shifted. Obviously now I do podcasting, also in research. Now I'm doing communications research, which I was not doing before, specifically looking at communications during the pandemic. And I think soon we're going to learn a lot more about what people have done, how they've gone about that process, what's worked, what hasn't, and hopefully use that to create more inclusive and effective communications moving forward. And that's the future I hope to see.
Great points made by everyone. Yeah, okay, I've got one more question, and then we'll start going through the chat questions. I've set some of them aside to be asked later, but the final question that has kind of links to before is there has been an increase in demand in SciComm because of the spread of all this news and these new terminologies and just the pace at which people had to keep up with SciComm and public health. So what recommendations do you have for people, maybe not necessarily to follow in your footsteps, but if they want to get into SciComm either as a full-time job or on the side, or being involved in already a structured environment to support SciComm endeavors. Yeah, any advice?
I can start. I was thinking about this the other day, actually. I was chatting to a group of researchers who are interested in getting started on social media for science communication. And the thing that they kept saying to me over and over is, but I'm not good at it yet. Like, how do I start? The content, it's not going to be very good. And I said, look, no one's good when they start. You should have seen what I was posting a few years ago. And I haven't deleted it. I've kept it as a memorial to how far I've come. I think that's the importance, right? Like you can just start in some small way, maybe writing a blog or writing an article or some posts on Instagram or anything you really want. And you're probably not going to be that good when you start, and it's going to be hard, but the best way to get better and to get more confident and make connections as well is to actually just start doing it. That's how I started, and probably a lot of people have a similar experience.
I think what Maddie just said is so well put. And I would just love to echo that there is no set pathway into science communication, which is both terrifying and thrilling, because when I decided I wanted to pursue science communication, that was the first time in my life where I didn't know exactly what the path ahead was going to look like. Up until that point, I thought I was going to continue into academia, but it also meant that I could chart my own path. So it means that pretty much anything can be a gateway into a career in science communication. You get to decide. So you can start literally anywhere, see where your interests take you, start building a portfolio, whether art or podcast recordings, any kind, social media posts, whatever it is that you want, and just start exploring career options. You've heard some fantastic examples tonight. You can find more by perusing any of our LinkedIn pages or connections on LinkedIn, or by searching jobs on like Google or LinkedIn or any other platform using keywords like science communication and consulting or podcasting or whatever it is that interests you. That's what helped me find my role. And just see what the options are out there that excite you. And I'll also add that when I first started, I felt pretty intimidated too, because it was almost like there were both too many options and also not enough of like specifically what I was looking for in science storytelling, but there was a lot out there in science communication. So it's kind of like where to begin. So for anybody who's interested, if you go to my website, it's sciencethroughstory.org. There is a list of resources you can download there of science communication resources that I recommend on any topic you might be interested in. And you can use that as a starting point for your explorations. And also I recommend checking out all of the links that Alison will share to do with all of the work of the panelists tonight. All of those would be great places to start.
I could share a little secret. I call it ACE. A, active, like C, collaborate, and E, engage. So ACE, so being active, to show up, be visible out there with people so that people remember you. And now you can, so it makes it a lot easier to talk to people and people feel comfortable with you. And collaborate, like find your group of people. So when I on Twitter, that I have like a group of people that that will support each other. I know that when I tweet something, then often they're like Jim, that he would always add a few words and he always support me. And when I see him out there, and I would support him, like a bit of teamwork to do it together. So there's people out there will support you. And engage positivity. It's really important because I think women, a lot of time, we have a lot of kind of internal words in our head, like, oh, maybe it's not worth writing that, or something, no, it's not important or something. But really try to engage in positivity. I think the words that you say to your head, or you say to yourself, your mind, really influence that how you present yourself to the world and how you engage yourself. So engage positivity, that would be my last advice. Yeah, ACE.
I just want to jump in and say, oh, sorry, Claudia, do you want to go first?
No, go ahead.
I think really, as you can see from the people on this panel, there are so many different ways to get into science communications, and science communications is how you define it, right? You don't have to be a scientist and a communicator. You can be a scientist who communicates or a communicator who likes science. So I think the most important thing is as long as you have a curiosity and an appetite to learn and that desire to share those stories with the public, with the world, then you already are a science communicator. Right? No one has to call you. I don't, it's not like, you know, I want to be a mechanical engineer. I mean, maybe in a few years, there'll actually be more of an official job title as science communicator. And obviously some organizations have adopted science communicator as an official job title. But even as a scientist, you know, you are communicating about your work. So you should be a science communicator if you are studying, researching, if you are involved in research of any kind. And, you know, at Children's Hospital Research Institute, we're very fortunate. We have hundreds of researchers who are doing amazing work, putting out hundreds of papers every year. But as a comms team, you know, it's our job to sort them and figure out which ones have the wow factor, which are the ones that the public are going to want to hear about. And it's the same thing when you're thinking about trying to storytell about your science or someone else's science. What does the public want to hear about? Like, what's timely, what's relevant? And I think, you know, my one tip would be to you is to listen to kids science podcasts. I think, Kaylee, you said you were involved with teaching kids science. Honestly, guys, they take the weirdest, most mundane topics and make them so fascinating. Like I have two girls, ages 6 and 11. We listen to a lot of these podcasts, ice cream flavors, mosquitoes, Greek mythology. Like, honestly, it's just this weird, like wide range of super entertaining for young and old. Like, I always listen to one of these things and come out of it thinking, wow, I just learned something I didn't know. And the topics are bizarre. So listen to a few kids podcasts. Exactly, Chris, you were listening, Robots and Pets, and media love stories about robots and pets, and also small children, cute children. So there you go.
Yes, I was just going to throw in actually that you don't necessarily need a job title to be a science communicator. Just as Elaine said, you can do it for fun on the side. You can just by speaking with your family, with your friends, with, you know, an audience of 20 people in a classroom who are not, you know, in the same topic as you. That's communicating science. And then my second, like, sort of tip or recommendation would just be like, do something that you like. You know, you don't have to speak about cancer biology if that's not what you're interested in. You can speak about what you're interested in. Something that you're interested in will help you be passionate about it, and you'll come across as a passionate person, and then you'll build that connection with your audience. And I think that's what people want to hear. They want to hear something you're passionate about, because they know that you're doing digging around, you're doing the looking around because you're interested. And just having a background in science, for example, you can go into different fields in science and understand the research more readily than somebody not in science at all. So you're still able to work in a different realm of science, even if it's not what your PhD is in, for example. So just broaden your horizons and be passionate. Follow your passions.
I think all those points about trying different things, finding out what you like, finding people to collaborate with. Honestly, science and communications is so much stronger when you've got a team and a community of people to work with. And so finding your people, I think, is an incredibly important part of all of this. One thing I want to come back to actually is something that Elaine said earlier, which is knowing your value. So you're getting into science communication, you're trying new things, you're working with different groups. Your work is valuable. And I don't know what everybody else's experience here has been, but at least for me, a lot of the work I did in the beginning was unpaid. It was volunteer time, and I was happy to do it. And it was expected that it was for free, frankly. I didn't even know that I could get paid. But know that your time is valuable, and that where their money is possible, it's not unreasonable to ask for an honorarium. And earlier in the chat, and I'll go find it again, this year, 500 women scientists did a fix the gap pay scale thing where they looked at the gender gap in pay for this kind of work. But they, as part of that process, they also gathered information about what people have been paid for running science communication workshops or giving lectures, and whether or not that pay is a great reflection of the value of work is not a part of that. But you can go on, you can see what other people have been paid, and it gives you a baseline to know what you can ask for. And I would just encourage you when you're going into this work to consider your time as valuable. And I know for me now, I consider when I'm asked to do something, value it brings to me. It could be value for my CV. Maybe it's something new that I haven't done before that will be a great addition. It's value to me personally. Being on something like this is so great. I get to meet lots of other people. I believe in it, and I want to see more women in science communication, and so I'm here. Or does it give me money? And that's a really great reason to do something. So consider all those things when you're thinking about whether or not to take something on.
Fabulous. I think everyone spoke. So we've got some time left to dive into some questions that I see in the chat. So the first question that we had was from Jared, and it was all about scientists and STEM professionals. So the question was, why do we not incorporate science communication into academic curriculum? And how do we incorporate it so the more scientists feel comfortable communicating?
I think I mentioned this in the chat, but I cannot emphasize enough that every academic institution, every research institute usually connected with a hospital has a comms team. And they are such a great source. I mean, they're the ones that can look at something. We're not, oh, actually I do have a couple scientists on my team currently, but that's not usually normal. Most of the people come from a communications background, but they can look at your work and say, okay, this is what I take from it. You know, and maybe I've got the science wrong, tell me if it's wrong, but I see this as the most interesting thing that you're doing. And then they'll work with you to try and craft your story, because their job is to get good media coverage of what's happening at the Research Institute. A lot of them offer media training. You know, for those of you at UBC, actually, they're just about to launch media training online media training resources for researchers. So, you know, these are the people who can be sort of first line of defense. Learn from them. You can look at the social media that your Research Institute puts out, see what they're doing, see the kind of stories that they're sharing, because they all have tons of options they could choose from. So why have they chosen that research to feature? So that's my big advice on that.
And the question was asking why this is not incorporated into like training for the scientists or in a curriculum. And I think this is not well known and maybe even not valued in academia sometimes. When you think about like when we submit that CV for annual review or for our tenure promotion, and social media or like being on the news, they don't really count. And it's really important. Like, don't get me wrong, I think that we have accountability because the money that we get to do our research is public dollars. It's our ethical and moral responsibility to tell the public that how did we use the money to do what kind of research, what kind of impact, and how the work that we do would actually help people or make any difference. But you know, in the academic world, it's not always valued. I don't know. I think kind of thing, you know, it's the way it's being set up, and it's problematic. Yes.
I think there's also a space usually to, you know, get in contact with your program or your school and request courses, or if you talk to different profs, see if anyone would be interested in teaching a course. I know teachers can usually present a course to a program and decide to teach it. So as long as there's interest within a school, I feel like there should be a way to get a class incorporated into a program. But I do agree that it should already be there, but it's not. But McGill is already changing itself. Like there's already 2 new science communication classes that you can do for. I know it is changing, but you might have to be sort of the action bringer in your school, unfortunately.
I'm just popping a couple of resources in the chat that do offer programs for more professional kind of training. So I don't know if you're familiar with the Alan Alda Institute, but that's in New York, started by Alan Alda, yes, from MASH, focused on science communication. And then there's also a science writers and communicators Canada-wide group. And so I've just put those few resources in the chat for more formal science communication education opportunities. Do any other panelists want to pop in?
I don't even remember what the question was at this point. So no.
Why what are some hurdles to training scientists, or why are scientists not learning science communication skills?
Oh, I see. Yeah, money. I think someone talked about money and just availability of courses, but I do think that that's changing. And again, as was just said, I mean, I think you're the change, right? You bring the conversations forward at your institutions about the importance of these things. I've seen many more science communication training workshops in recent years. And I know someone in the chat earlier was saying that they teach a course in science communication, I think, at UBC. So those things are being offered. We've got one at SFU, but sometimes they're within their own departments, which is a problem. Like we've got one in health communications. I put a textbook that we wrote for a risk communication course, but again, it's a health focus. And so sometimes you'll have to look outside of your present department to see if you find something, but yeah, push for those things in your institutions if you can.
And I'll also add quickly, if definitely like utilize the resources that already exist, find out where they are. And if they don't exist, find out who else is interested in bringing those resources to your institution, because maybe you can write a grant together. There might already be existing funding somewhere in somebody's grant to bring those resources in or to put something together. That was actually largely how I got involved. I started asking around about grants I could apply to for like science communication funding. And then I ran into a professor who said, actually, we have funding to put a workshop together for a week, but we don't have anybody to do it yet. Would you be interested in doing that? I'm like, sure. I had no idea how to do any of that, but I started figuring it out really quick, and we had the funding to bring in practitioners and experts of different kinds, and that's kind of how I started figuring it out. So, and then I ended up teaching that class annually for 5 years, and that led to developing a new program for which we got a new grant. So it snowballs. So ask around, see what already exists. If it doesn't exist, see who else is interested in collaborating on making it happen.
Absolutely. Fabulous advice. So we've got a fun question all about surprising jobs. So in science communication, what is the most surprising job or experience you've had?
I'll pop in, I guess. The most surprising, it wasn't a job, but the most surprising thing that came out of being in science communication for me was collaborating with a friend, and she wrote a really incredible children's book. Again, children's science, so fun, about urban ecology. It's called Chasing Bats and Tracking Rats, Urban Ecology and Neighborhood Science and How We Share Our Cities. And you meet several different scientists, and we had met at a conference and shared our love of science communication, and she was running ComSciCon Can, which I've been blasting in the chat. And so we sort of became friends over that mutual interest, and she ended up featuring me in her book. And one of the stories is about, I used to do research on urban rats here in Vancouver's downtown east side. I bought a van, I turned it into a lab. I was driving it around the city, collecting rats. And it's all about Harold, the first rat I ever caught, who escaped into the van and I couldn't catch for 2 weeks. But then it also pivots to talking about how we manage rats and how we should be thinking differently. Instead of putting down poisons, we should house people and keep them away from vulnerable situations. And it was a really interesting look at seeing someone take one of your stories and turn it into something for kids, and pulling out some really adult ideas, but presenting it for children. And so that was the most surprising for me and really rewarding.
I've got one interesting one, which is a job I've actually done, and that is helping new startups to develop their science communication strategy and their vision for themselves that they want to present to investors, the public, etc. So I've worked with a few biotech and medtech startups to develop these messages, and it's really fun, really challenging. So if anyone has an interest in the business and the entrepreneurial side of science communication, there are heaps of opportunities there.
I see there are more and more knowledge translation type of job, like, or knowledge mobilization, like SFU has that, and other labs and organization have, like research organization also have them. And I think those are like super fun job because you get to help to write stories and help to like translate like complex research into a way that the public can understand, a lot of storytelling, and people use all kinds of techniques, cartoon, art, videos. I love videos. It's so much fun doing this kind of job. So I really see that like now when we apply for any kind of grant, we always have to enter like knowledge translations, and having people who have expertise to do communications through these like KT or KM kind of job. I think, yeah, I think they are super fun. Yeah.
I'll throw in a fun example that was very unexpected. I was once contacted by Disney World, by Animal Kingdom, which is part of Disney World in Orlando, Florida. And they asked me to come run a science communication workshop for their animal science team and for their guest engagement teams. And I never, ever would have expected that, because I thought Disney has like infinite resources and, you know, what would they need me for? I was only a couple of years into doing this work at the time, still a grad student. But what I didn't realize was that because I had both a science background and I was doing science storytelling stuff, they thought, oh, this person's a perfect fit. And turns out they did not have a resident science storytelling expert. So doing that, when I actually got paid to go to Disney World, probably the most fun job I will ever have had. That also led to some consulting with the Imagineers who designed new sections of the park. So all of that was completely unexpected. Never would have dreamed that that would be a possibility. But I ended up getting contacted by these people because of a mutual friend who I met at a conference. And I share that to emphasize, I know networking has come up several times in the chat already and in this conversation, but really just reaching out, expanding your network and meeting all kinds of people who are interested in science communication and interested in whatever it is that gets you excited. You never know where that's going to lead. And again, like going back to don't undersell yourself, don't underestimate your value, not just don't underestimate the value of the time that you put in, but don't underestimate the value of the possibly unique set of insights and experiences and skills that you might be able to bring to the table. You never know who that might be particularly applicable to or useful for, and what you can help them out with or where that might lead. And I'll also add that all of the other examples sounded super fun and like stuff that I would love to work on as well. So, and pretty much any kind of work that you do in science communication can pretty much guarantee that it's going to be a good time.
Awesome. Well, we are at 5:30. So I'm just going to ask the SCWIST team to put in, there is a lovely link tree that has everyone's LinkedIn information. So I'll ask them to post that in the chat. But I'm willing to, if we want to continue the conversation for another few minutes or ask some more questions, I'm able to stick around if anyone else wants to stick around.
Yeah, Alison, I had a few people ask me, we are planning to send out the recording and we'll use the emails that you had registered with. So if you hadn't done that, can you please go back in and do that? And we'll send the chat and the video from this conversation today. Thank you so much to all the moderators, and panelists today. This has been really amazing, and we had an amazing turnout. This is not usually how big our events get, and I'm just amazed to see how many of you came, and from all across the world too. So thank you.
Thank you, SCWIST, for hosting.
Yeah.
I think you're muted, Alison.
Of course. Thank you. Yeah, so one of the questions that popped up, I think it was addressed a few times, was if you don't necessarily want to start your own initiative, and we've shared a few resources in the chat, do you have any advice for refining current SciComm skills that maybe you've learned from?
I think one of them is, I think Kaylee mentioned it, or we all may have, is talking to children. You know, you have to simplify something the most when you're talking to someone who has no background in science. So the easiest population of that is children. Also, there's programs like 3-minute thesis for any grad students, but you can probably do this with any scientific sort of project or story that you're working on, is trying to shorten it to as short as possible. So 3 minutes or less. So I've had like 1-minute speaking competitions where you have to say your thesis in 1 minute. So this really makes you like break down every single thing you want to say and think about it really, really in every different way possible. How short can you make your sentence? How clear can you make your message? So all of these, like the shorter you need to say something, the more specific you have to be. And that's just a great way to hone your skills, like by yourself. Just practice it by yourself in your room. You don't necessarily need an audience. Give your elevator pitch, of some science topic you like, and just try to make people understand.
Oh, Claudia, that is so perfect, because you know what I wish in my ideal world is that every researcher who is writing up a proposal has to show their lay abstract to an actual lay person. I don't, I suppose, basically taken their, proposal and just cut out some lines and just made it a shorter version of it. It's just like no one understands that. Okay. So, I think it's also trying to get through to the researchers. Like the benefit to you is that, the more people who know about what you're doing, the more chances are that you might get more funding, right? Publicity equals money is how we like to sell it when we're doing our media training to our investigators. But if everyone could just run their lay summaries to actual real people, like show your parents if they're not scientists, show your friends, show people, who are in other fields of study and say, hey, do you understand this? And get them to explain it back to you. And then you'll know whether you've captured it.
I'll add to that the writer John Steinbeck once said, there has never been a great scientist who could not discourse freely and interestingly with a child. So I think that's a great frame of reference to use. And I put in the link or in the chat a link to something called the Upgoer 5 text editor. If anyone's familiar with the comic XKCD, it's a webcomic written by a scientist that kind of makes fun of scientists and how they have trouble explaining things to people. And so somebody took inspiration from that comic and they made this text editor where you can put any words in and it will highlight or underline in red anything that is not included in the 1,000 most commonly used words in English. So it forces you to strip away, not just the jargon, but anything that is even remotely complicated. It really forces you to bring it down to the level that a 4 or 5-year-old would understand. And I find it so helpful because it's not only fun and hilarious, but it forces you to strip out all the complexity completely and then build it back up gradually as appropriate to the audience that you're trying to reach. And I've used this with so many people. It was introduced to me by a friend. I love it. And I'm actually going to be giving a talk on my dissertation research only using this text editor at a conference in a couple weeks at the American Geophysical Union. This has become so popular. They have an entire session just dedicated to the Upgoer 5 challenge, where you have to give a lightning talk using only the 1,000 most common words. So I highly, highly recommend it.
Okay. I figured out how I muted myself. It's with the space bar. Yeah. Is there, does anyone have any questions in the chat that they want to pop in? We've still got 73 people hanging on. Feel free to pop something into the chat. What I have done is if you are looking on honing some skills and have some time, Science Sam Canada is an organization that I volunteer with. We're actively looking for volunteers to help us build a website because we just have a link tree at the moment. And Science Slam Canada is essentially an opportunity for scientists to talk about their research, or a science enthusiast talk about something they're excited about. They have 5 minutes, no slides. They can use all sorts of creative storytelling methods. I know someone that talked about a math topic using a single piece of paper to talk about infinity, which is pretty cool. People have used puppets. So Science Sam Canada is looking for people to help kind of create more science communication opportunities for scientists to be able to share the work publicly, as well as just another opportunity to hone your science communication skills. So I've put that into the chat. And yeah, if you're outside of Canada, that's totally fine to volunteer as well, because many of the positions are remote. Does anyone else have any other opportunities that they would like to share?
Hi, Alice. We have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
Hey, hi, Sarah. My question was for you, and you probably already answered it. I put it in the chat. I was trying to, you were talking a little bit about your role, and I was trying to understand a little bit more of what you do. And you said that a part of your role includes teaching others how to integrate storytelling when they're working with clients. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit, can you provide a little bit more specifics on what you mean by that? Is this a part of a consulting type role, or do you work for a company where you have to like teach their teams how to communicate science to, for whatever reason? I know in my role, we have to sell products. I work for Dow Chemical, and there's a marketing interface where they have to describe technical concepts for customers, such that they can sell their products or help them with whatever their needs. So I was just trying to find some similarities between what you describe in your role and how that may apply to others. So if you can share some specifics.
Sure. Thanks for thanks for your question, Chris. I do kind of a little bit of all of the above, as you described. Some of it is developing workshops that we then offer to clients to help them gain science communication skills. So we might be offering a workshop to a team at a company or at a university or at an event. So some of it is kind of just helping people gain general science communication skills that they can apply to whatever it is that they need. And then some of the work is working with specific clients on specific projects and helping them develop a story around whatever it is that they need to communicate. So a lot are either in the healthcare industry or in sustainability. So for example, helping a foundation to plan a forum that is around climate action, or helping a company like a major vaccine company, for example, to communicate around new treatments that they're developing. So it sounds like it's a little bit similar to what you're doing, but we're kind of both teaching people how to fish, so to speak, in terms of teaching them science communication skills, and then also helping them find the best place to fish, so to speak, helping them craft the story around what they need to communicate. And if you have any more questions, please feel free to email me anytime. I'm happy to chat.
Thank you.
See networking happening in real time. This is wonderful. Yeah, I don't see any more questions in the chat. I think everything has been covered. So this is recorded, and we will be sending out a list of the links, several of which were shared in the chat. And I would like to thank all of our panelists for participating. This was very informative, the chat, and thank you so much for getting involved with the chat as well. I saw that many of our panelists were engaging with people in the chat, which was fabulous. And I guess that's it. That's all I have to say. Thank you so much. And thanks for everyone for attending, and keep science communicating.